Welcome to Dementia Unravelled. I'm Lyndal Harris, a dementia doula, sharing information about dementia and brain health to help us better understand it. If someone told you that a loved one had dementia, would you actually know what that means? Most people think they do, but the reality is actually quite different. Many people assume dementia is a single disease or that it's about memory loss. And today we're going to unpack what dementia actually is, because understanding it makes everything else make more sense. Dementia is actually an umbrella term. It's not a single disease. It's a term that describes a group of conditions that affect our brain structure and how that brain then functions. There are over 120 different types of dementia, and the changes can affect memory, thinking, language, problem solving, personality, and behaviour. And the other thing with dementia is that it is progressive, so symptoms will gradually change over time. So I'll run through some of the more common types of dementias and how they may look, because different types of dementias actually affect different parts of the brain. And so that's when we can see sometimes that it affects and changes people in different ways. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, and people often use the terms dementia and Alzheimer's interchangeably. But as you just heard, Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, but dementia is definitely not Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease usually begins with changes in memory, and it can gradually affect thinking and language and daily functioning over time. Vascular dementia is the second most common dementia in people over the age of 65, and it's caused by a reduction in blood flow to the brain. So it can often happen after strokes or there's been damage to blood vessels. People with vascular dementia might experience problems with planning and decision-making or concentration, and sometimes these changes can happen more suddenly. Lewy body dementia is caused by abnormal protein deposits in the brain called Lewy bodies. It can actually affect thinking and movement, which is why it overlaps with Parkinson's disease dementia, and people may also experience things like visual hallucinations and sleep disturbances. Frontotemporal dementia is often referred to as FTD. This type of dementia affects the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain, and instead of memory being the first sign, families will often notice changes in behaviour, personality, language, or social awareness. There are a few different types of FTD. You have the behavioural variant, which is the most common of them and focuses on personality changes, primary progressive aphasia, which affects language skills, and movement disorders. FTD is one of the more common types of dementia in younger onset dementia, which is dementia diagnosed before the age of 65. And people can also have mixed dementia, where they have more than one type of dementia. And probably the most common there is Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. I just mentioned younger onset dementia. Younger onset dementia is for anybody who's diagnosed before the age of 65. You may hear some people refer to it as early onset dementia, but younger onset dementia is the correct term, and that helps, I guess, distinguish between younger onset diagnosed before the age of 65 and early onset might be the beginning of or early stages of any dementia. So talking about younger onset dementia, there are around 29,000 Australians living with younger onset dementia at the time of this recording, and they often have very different challenges. They could still be working, raising families and managing finances. And we'll actually explore this a little bit more in a future episode. Dementia can also affect children. Childhood dementia in Australia affects about 1 in every 2,900 babies, with roughly 2 children born with the condition every week. There are over 100 rare genetic disorders that cause this condition, which leads to premature deaths, with about 70% of children dying before the age of 18. So that covers a little bit about what dementia is. I also wanted to talk about what dementia is not and bust a few myths that are out there. So, myth number one is that dementia is a normal part of aging. Dementia is not a normal part of aging. Aging is the biggest risk factor, but dementia is caused by diseases of the brain. And we know that many people live into their 80s, 90s, or their hundreds even without developing it. And I think that this is a topic that a lot of people do think that it can be a normal part of aging. If someone's in their mid to late 80s or their 90s, then memory issues are a given. But memory issues like forgetting your keys or forgetting what you walked into a room for is quite different to the memory and the changes in everyday activities that can be linked to dementia. And I actually have my own interesting story around people thinking memory loss is a normal part of aging, because I took my mum to the doctor quite a number of years ago because we were noticing a difference in her memory. And I'll never forget how cranky and rude to me the doctor was because I had the audacity to take my mum there. And actually, I thought I was being a good, caring daughter. And so she was really quick to sort of snap at me that, people of a certain age, what do you expect? And it's a part of aging, and you're just bringing your mum here and making her feel worse. And of course, I felt incredibly guilty after that. And I was confused because there were certain things that were happening that were concerning. That particular doctor left the doctor's surgery and retired. And mum ended up seeing a new, fairly young doctor that had just started there. And she was really curious as to why I was at the appointment with her. She was curious as to what was happening with mum's memory. And so she referred mum to go and get a brain scan, which was in line with what can be seen in Alzheimer's disease. And so she referred us to a geriatrician. And luckily, mum has been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment for over 5 years. But mild cognitive impairment for about 50% of people then turns into Alzheimer's disease. But because we knew that it was mild cognitive impairment and we weren't just wondering and we had that diagnosis, it meant that we could implement strategies that were going to help mum. But I thought it was really interesting that the GP was not only really dismissive of it being part of aging, but was quite offended for mum that I'd gone to the appointment with mum, which was really quite strange. So just be mindful that if someone says to you it's just a normal part of aging, there is a certain level of memory loss that is part of aging, but then there is another level, which is something that you should perhaps keep asking about or keep being curious about. Myth number 2 is that dementia only affects memory. It also affects how a person thinks, how they feel, how they behave, and their ability to complete everyday tasks. And it really does depend on which part of the brain is affected. And that is why no two people have the same dementia journey. Someone can have the same diagnosis as another person and have completely different symptoms. And so we just need to take into account that it's not just memory when we're talking about dementia. It can be a range of other things as well. Myth number 3 is nothing can be done. Whilst there is no cure for dementia, that part is true, but there is plenty that can be done for brain health, for quality of life, for meaningful engagement and meaningful connection. And the earlier you get a diagnosis or you recognise these changes, the better some of these interventions work to actually push back the symptoms of dementia. And myth number 4 is the person disappears. Dementia changes the brain. It doesn't remove the person. The person living with dementia still has emotions. They still want connection, and they still deserve dignity and meaningful engagement and connection. Although dementia changes the brain, it doesn't change the fact that the person is still there. And that's why supportive environments and understanding how things change for someone living with dementia are so important. Because the more we understand and the more we know about dementia, the better we can support people living with it and their families and loved ones. In the next episode, we're talking about something I hear from adult children all the time. Is this just normal aging? You may notice something's off, but you don't know what you're looking at. Next week, we're unpacking the early signs of dementia, what to watch for, what's just part of getting older, and what to do if your gut is telling you that something isn't right. Thanks for listening to Dementia Unravelled. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and share it with someone who might find it helpful. Links to my website and socials and any resources mentioned can be found in the show notes. This podcast is for educational purposes only and isn't a substitute for professional medical advice.